Welcome to Closing Arguments, where Andrew and I discuss the previous episode of Testify. In this episode, we're going to be talking about episode 2, Deserted, the story about the Ferry family. For this conversation, we've invited Genevieve Curtis from KFOX-14.
I'm Genevieve Curtis. I am an investigative reporter at KFOX-14.
I guess I would ask for you to spell your name, but we won't do that because we don't have a CG to make for you.
You don't have a super to put on TV
no,
for me?
I don't.
We always ask people to spell their names because we want to make sure we get it accurate, right?
Yes, we do.
I have been the chief investigative reporter at KFOX for the last 5 years, and I have been a reporter in El Paso for the last 6.5, almost 7 years.
Wow.
So when did you start in El Paso? When did you come to KFOX?
May of 2012.
Oh,
So you're a veteran.
Yes.
That's what they call me.
Yeah, actually, when we were doing this story and looking back, this particular story, which is the death of Jackson Ferry, as we're about to discuss, happened in the fall of 2013. And we started looking at reporters that may have been around at that time, and you were one of the only ones that was still working. So we were like, Jen's going to have to be the one that comes in and gives us a little bit of media perspective on what happened and what was going through the minds of everybody at that time. So
yeah, I mean, that's just the nature of the business. A lot of people cycle through El Paso, right, as journalists. They come in and come out. So I'm lucky to have been in this city for as long as I have and have some of that institutional knowledge and covered a lot of these stories. So we're in the newsroom that weekend, and I very distinctly remember that this came across from police that there was a family missing. And so whenever you have a child go missing, an Amber Alert, that becomes your number one story. That is the most important story of the day. Because a lot of times it's up to the media to make sure that face is seen by viewers across the country, that it gets picked up nationally, that there is a lot of effort that goes into making sure that if we have a missing child, that story gets told. Yeah. And so when you have not one child missing, but two, and then both parents, that is very alarming.
Well, not only that, but I think that, you might have a family that perhaps goes off the grid, and that's one thing. But for the police to feel that it was so necessary to put out that alert to us is very unusual. Very. And I think that was one of the things. I was also working in a newsroom at the time, so I thought that was one of the most unusual aspects of it to me, because it's not like, they just got up and went on vacation and didn't tell anybody. Right. Clearly, the police here, they have a high standard to meet before they put that sort of information out to the media.
It's incredibly rare that you see a family unit going missing, and then for police to say we believe that they are in danger. So that heightens everyone's awareness. That is, kind of a buzzword. If you believe that this family is in danger, obviously we didn't know about the suicide note at the time, but the house was described as being ransacked. Right. So you start to think, were they fleeing? Were they in danger? Did something go wrong and somebody came after them? Did they go to Mexico? We're so close to the border. Yeah. Are you fleeing something that you're in fear of and left quickly? Or did somebody come in and do some harm to this family? And it's not uncommon. You see that happen across the country.
Yeah, I think it was very late on Friday, and then the story just picked up real quick from Saturday. And I know, did your reporters went to the house?
Correct, yes.
And what did they find when they went to the house? Do you remember?
I don't remember what they found when they went to the house, but that's where you go when somebody goes missing. They talk to neighbors. I remember that neighbors describe them as like a normal family, right? They're this normal couple. They have these 2 little boys that are so precious. They're a military family. They obviously don't have a lot of ties to El Paso. Their ties are back in the Midwest. They're from Illinois. So they're trying to gather, when a reporter goes to the scene, they're trying to gather, like, who are these people? Right. What do they like to do? What are they like? Tell us about them so we can put a human face and information about who these people are to our viewers.
And at that time, they had just been living at that house for a couple of months, right? They hadn't been that long there that long. And I remember seeing one of the news stories. I think it was something on Facebook where one of the neighbors actually told the reporter that he didn't even know that they had kids, because he never saw the kids around.
I believe that was one of the neighbors. I don't remember which report it was, but I know at my station that I was working at, our reporter went, and the landlord was there at the time when they went. And we found it so odd because the landlord was like, yeah, come in. And they went in with the cameras and everything, and I was like, "Did the police not secure the scene? Like they didn't do any of that." So our reporters were kind of like in and out of the house.
And that was so unusual. I mean,
it
that
was
would just
really
never.
Unusual.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not normal
Questions
procedure.
From a question from somebody that consumes the news: is there a point in ethics where somebody should be cautious about going in? Should they contact the police first, or
I
how
think
does somebody
that if
approach
the
this?
police haven't already secured the scene and that's the homeowner that's having you walk with them, from our standpoint, it's fair game. You go ahead and go in because you're talking about the homeowner there.
Right.
You know,
Right, the landlord has allowed you entry.
Is allowing entry. So from our standpoint, okay, well, we're being invited in by the owner. There's no legalities there.
And do you
I mean, I don't
remember-
know if that's the same where you're working, but that was certainly.
Right.
I think I wasn't working that Saturday, but I think that there was some discussion as to whether or not that person goes in or not.
And do you remember hearing from the police that, perhaps they should have secured the house before that?
No, I don't think there was any discussion. I really think I think that the police may have already been in and out of there before that, and they just, I think, maybe didn't
Well, I think
that it
knowing
was,
what we know now and what eventually came out, there was a suicide note found, no reason to suspect foul play. It no longer is a crime scene. So
I think that was
and
the
I don't know
idea.
that to be a fact, but that would be the line of thinking.
So I've had this one burning question that nobody really seems to know the answer, and I don't know if you would, but there was some reports that either Jenna, one news article said it was Jenna, one article said it was Jeffrey, that one of them rented a U-Haul 2 days after Jackson's death. Now, everyone I've spoken to in researching this for weeks has never been able to answer what that was, because I still have questions. What was the point of renting that U-Haul if they weren't leaving for 3 weeks after that point? And was that U-Haul used to move something out of that house? And then is that why it was partially ransacked? Is that why there were no mattresses or beds? I'm just curious as to what the purpose of renting this U-Haul so close after his death was.
I think those are going to be questions for Jenna and Jeffrey Ferry if they ever answer their questions, because I remember seeing that information as well, but I think there's so much about this case that because they didn't go to trial, still remain questions that are unanswered, and they may take that with them for the rest of their lives and never quite tell the truth of what happened.
And then another thing, because they pled guilty, there was no trial, there's no transcripts, there's limited open records. And because this was related to a child abuse neglect case, those records are sealed. And I've been going through months trying to get a lot of this stuff, actually for a year, trying to get some of this stuff. And because of state law, as far as the family code, because it involves those charges, they're fighting it. They're saying, we're not going to release that.
Well, and you also have to understand a lot of the documents in this case, because they weren't arrested in El Paso, they were arrested in Michigan. Mm-hmm. The body was not discovered in El Paso. It was discovered in New Mexico. Right. So you're dealing with multiple different law enforcement agencies here. And each law enforcement agency in each state has their own procedure for acquiring records. Yeah. And so that's the reason why in this particular case there's a wall when it comes to some information. Some of it was a little bit more public record, like the fact that, we were able to find out, I think you mentioned that we were able to figure out pretty early on that they had received some sort of money from Jeffrey's family, and I think that was public records. So that was something that was pretty easily searchable. But
there was some probate.
As far as some of the other information, when we spoke with Joe Spencer, he said no, they buried the baby the same day or the day after. Right. So I still don't know the reason for that U-Haul either. I think you said that you had to look back in some of your files because.
Yeah, I looked back on some of our stories and our scripts because this case is very memorable in so many ways, but there was so many layers, like we were talking about earlier, that I said, if we're going to be discussing this in detail, I just want to be clear on some of the details on what we reported and how it all unfolded, because to me, it was such a whirlwind case. I mean, this family goes missing. You're talking about a nationwide search for 2 little boys and their parents who are believed to be in danger. Then it comes out that there's a suicide note, and you don't know if a parent's on a suicide mission to take their entire family out. And then, just a few days later, they're found in Michigan without baby Jackson.
And then, she still had the gall to lie and say that the baby was with her mother.
Right.
I mean, at what point does somebody realize, hey, the gig is up? I mean, she still lied to the very end.
I think when you are committed to your lie, you are going to stick with it. And when you're committed to not being held accountable for what you did, you're going to stick to that for as long as you possibly can. I think from all of the evidence that we saw, from how they, planned, they kept the baby for a long time, they buried the baby, they left this suicide note to throw police off their trail. She was very calculated in how she went about this plan. And I really think, from my own perspective, that she thought she was smarter than police and that she was going to get away with this at some point, or that Jeffrey would end up taking the fall for all of it.
Well, so one thing that I was, going back and looking at old articles and stuff and videos, one thing I wish I would have been able to see was somebody talk to Jeffrey's coworkers and say, from the time that Jackson had passed to the time that he stopped showing up to work, that was 3 weeks. Did they not see a change in his behavior? Did they not recognize something was wrong? And what was his behavior like this whole time? If he was so passive and so easily manipulated, how did he go 3 weeks and just passing this off as like nothing happened? I can't understand how somebody could not see that happen. There's something wrong.
Both of us are looking at each other like, we don't,
I just don't.
Yeah.
But so much of this is what's wrong, right? I mean, if you look at the theory that the defense is putting out there that baby Jackson died of malnutrition, which we will never really know how baby Jackson died because the autopsy was not conclusive. And in those findings, obviously, that he was malnourished to some extent, maybe not enough to kill him. But that is a deliberate choice that you make not to feed your child.
Right.
So how do you not feed your child for so long and not notice those signs and symptoms that your child isn't eating? Right. Meanwhile, we're seeing YouTube videos of them drag racing, buying these cars, and doing all of these, lavish lifestyle type choices, but you're choosing not to feed your child?
It's not like it's something that was a sudden death. There was something leading up to that. Mm-hmm. It's not like it was Sid's, crib death or something like that just happened. And even at that point, if it was a slow, over a period of time that the baby was just getting weaker and weaker, I just don't understand how somebody will be under the control of, allegedly under the control of his wife so much that they won't even take their own baby to the hospital. Especially when you're in the military and you have free health care, when you have the resources for that. I mean, it's not like they were living in poverty and they had no insurance. To me, it just doesn't make sense. And that's why the fact that Jeffrey's attorney alludes to the fact that he was so easily manipulated and he was weak-minded, I just don't buy that.
I don't know what to say about that, but I do think that, babies cry when they're hungry. So if this poor baby Jackson was crying because he was hungry, he was this malnourished, that is something that as a parent you would notice. And there was obviously neglect that has been at the forefront of this case was the neglect.
It was a pattern with her, at least. Obviously his attorney, we did not speak with her attorney, so I need to make that real clear that I called that it's really difficult because we're able to give Jeffrey's side because we were able to talk to Spencer, but we did not speak with her attorney, who may have given a different perspective on this. But from the perspective that we did get, it was that she was the one that was really doing a lot of things unbeknownst to him for quite a while. And he came back and didn't even know that there were CPS charges until just like a month before the baby died and, all of this stuff. However, you're right in that aspect. If you have a child who's screaming and crying, you either make the choice to go in and care for that child, or you make the choice to ignore it.
Right.
And at some point, there was obviously a choice made to ignore it.
Yeah, and we can't speak to their mind frame. You know, I would never venture to guess what he was thinking or what she was thinking, but the outcome remains the same, right? That you have a baby dead in the desert, and he was malnourished, and those are the facts. And so those are choices that are made along the way to get to the point where a child is malnourished. Yeah. The neglect charges from the baby Blake that Jenna initially had piqued our interest as reporters, because that's a matter of, well, who was supposed to be checking up on the family?
Right.
Was CPS failing this family? Were they checking up regularly? So that was, as a newsroom, a decision that we made. Okay, we need to look into these past charges and where the system may have failed baby Jackson.
Yeah.
Can you explain just a little bit about a reporter's relationship with like some of these like more federal agencies like the U.S. Army, or in this case the CPS, when you're trying to get information on them from them about their procedure and stuff? How does that work for you guys? Like, was that a conversation that they were willing to have with you?
It can be tough. I think it's important when you have good relationships with people in the community. We do have good relationships with a lot of authorities in town, and they are usually very forthcoming in situations. We're able to have a dialogue about, you know, maybe what transpired procedurally. There was a lot, though, with this case specifically that they didn't have answers either. I remember that being very clear, that there weren't a lot of answers. And so a lot of times when something is fresh, which can be frustrating, when something is fresh and happening and this is the news of the day and we're looking for answers now, a lot of agencies don't have the answers that we're looking for right then and there because they are conducting their own investigation, right? So they're looking into, okay, did we do everything we needed to do? Did we visit? Did we? And CPS said, you know, we did have a caseworker and they were having regular visits with CPS. So I think that internally becomes something that they look into. And so meanwhile, it starts to fade from the headlines, right?
Well, and I don't know the answer to this either because I've never had to deal with CPS or even asked CPS this question. But obviously the initial charges were against Jenna for the care of Blake, which was their older child. Right. So the question is, when CPS is doing their regular casework, are they aware that there's a second child that they also need to be checking on? I don't know the answer to that. So, you know, it's very possible that they were doing their regular checks on Blake.
Well, they were doing
unaware, you know, I don't know.
So I would, you know, if you're doing a home visit, but, you know.
Yeah, from my understanding, as far as the diversion program that she was in, that it consisted of the alcohol treatment and all that, she had to report on a regular basis. But I can't prove this, but from somebody I spoke to, after a couple of months, they just said, you just call us every week. Mm-hmm. So that was one of those things where I think she kind of, maybe somebody else that was supposed to be checking had the same protocol, like just call us and let us know if there's anything that you need or something. But that's how a lot of these agencies work, is they're overwhelmed with a lot of cases, and especially when you have minors. The state of Texas, CPS in general, they want to keep the baby in the home because it's hard to find foster families, because it's difficult to put a child in the system because that affects their behavior long term. So there's a lot of reasons that CPS wouldn't seize the child.
Well, and of course, this is all kind of suspect. You know, we don't know what actually happened in that case, and we will never know. I don't know that CPS is really willing to ever give that sort of information out to anybody. But what did remain clear is that when we did speak with Joe Spencer, he mentioned that Jeffrey had told Jenna that he wanted to take the baby to the doctor. Right. And that she was the one that told him, no, well, CPS will, come take the baby or get involved if if there's something wrong with the child. Well,
that can be a motivating factor, right? You already have these charges. You've already been on CPS's radar, and you still are on their radar, and now your second child has a second issue. those are motivations to try and conceal what's happening in your home. I think that I know for certain, we did interview State Rep Joe Pickett about the CPS issue. I remember in that story, looking back on what aired, he said there's no reason to think that CPS failed here. They did have protocols in place, and sometimes it's really hard to second guess
absolutely
a federal agency or caseworkers. And
let's be also very, very, very clear. Ultimately, the failure does not come down to the state agency; it comes down to the parent, and they were the two responsible for that child.
Right.
First and
it's easy
foremost.
to go back and say,
it's very easy.
They should have taken the
criticize.
child away. But that goes for any crime. There's a lot of people
Correct.
that do that are involved in a brutal crimes, brutal murders that had no criminal history before that.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, but as a news organization, it is our job to hold people accountable and to hold those federal agencies accountable. And so that was definitely an avenue that we explored. We talked a lot about, we did several interviews on, and made sure that was part of our coverage of this case because, the children are our most vulnerable, and baby Jackson is a victim and he has no voice. And so it is our job to make sure that the system didn't fail him and to bring that to light if we can. And so that was definitely part of this case, which was just another layer of so many bizarre twists and turns that we saw happening here.
So as far as the episode, you already heard it, but is there anything that you heard in the episode that you weren't aware of?
So that's interesting that you say that because when you interviewed Jenna's friend, and she was talking about how she was saying, well, if baby Blake dies, I'll just have another baby.
And actually, let me go ahead and play that real quick. That way we have a little context in here.
Disturbing. And then what she said with Blake when she was pregnant, because we were telling her, don't go on an airplane to Texas because you're really far along and you might end up going into labor and hurting the baby. And she's like, oh, well, if this one dies, I'll just make a new one.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that speaks to no maternal instincts.
Right. And I followed up with a question about her sense of humor, and she said she was just not a nice person.
Well, what I will say, when we started looking into their background, once it was identified that it was potentially baby Jackson that was found in New Mexico, and once they were brought back to El Paso from Michigan, and we saw this, what we call the perp walk, right?
Right. If you can explain what the perp walk is, because that's definitely like the journalism lingo right there.
So a perp walk is when we know that somebody has been arrested and that the authorities, whomever the arresting agency is that they are going to be led into jail. And that, as reporters, is our one chance before they go behind bars, before their lawyers get involved, before the courts take over, for us to ask them questions. And you'd be surprised how often people will have something to say. But you also get a sense of someone's demeanor in those perp walks. Yeah. And it is sometimes 10, 15, I've been a part of 20 reporter, photographer perp walks where everybody's got the cameras going, the lights are hot, there's a lot of movement, because the authorities want to make sure that they get them into custody quickly, into jail quickly. So you're moving, there's microphones everywhere, and you're just shouting questions, hoping that they will give you some sort of response and some sort of answer. But it really is like our one chance to get something from them. Like, give us an answer. Tell us. Explain to us. And
as a viewer myself, what I see, especially during this one, is that you saw reporters competing to get their questions in and answered, but you also see them working as a team. At one point, you see one of the photographers, one of the cameramen, actually guide the other cameraman to make sure he doesn't trip. And everybody's like working together, but they're trying to. Yeah, it's
well. And
it's
when I rewatched it, I thought it was interesting because it was so quiet for a period of time. And then I believe it was Bill Malusian, who worked for KFOX, that asked that very first question. And his first question was, why did you kill your baby? I think it was, or something along those lines. And that was the floodgate. It was like the permission slip for all the others just to start going ahead and bombarding her. And so it was so quiet up to that point. I was kind of like, wait, don't they ask her a lot of questions? I forgot, rewatching it. And then I was like, oh, there it starts. It was like, I think everyone didn't know what to do for a few minutes.
And you really... It's not so much a competition to get your question answered. It's you have 1 minute.
Right.
I mean, they're like you gotta get that question in because that is your time to get the other side of the story. We have gotten the side of the story from investigators. We've gotten the side of the story from other people involved. But this is our one chance to get their side of the story.
Right.
And so we're shouting to get some sort of reaction. What are you going to answer this? Do you feel bad about what you did? Why did you do it? You're asking those open-ended questions, hoping that something will stick. And her smirk told me... And told a lot of us, in our opinion, when you're viewing somebody that's smirking during a perp walk, that they're enjoying the attention. And I think that speaks so highly to everything we've seen and everything that we know about her.
Right.
We see Jenna walking into jail, and we have all the cameras on her, and she's in handcuffs. We're doing a lot of digging on who these people are, and you're seeing these YouTube rants. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert in that field. But I think what you see is somebody who has a very clear personality disorder.
Yeah.
That is narcissism. The way that she was ranting and talking about herself and smoking in her house where the kids are there. And then the way she was interacting on social media, we're seeing these posts that she has. It's very me driven. And so when the friend from high school is telling you, Charlie, about how she was like, well, if this baby dies, I'll just get another one. That is, to me, it appears to be, well, these kids are a way of me getting attention. Right. I had babies. I get attention. I post pictures. It's a classic narcissism that baby is disposable to you.
Right.
And ultimately was disposable to her.
And there's another thing about her Facebook page that she posted pictures of her, saying that she was going to lose weight. She was losing weight. She was changing her hair color. She was really good at doing her nails. And on several posts, she would mention how her breasts were starting to go down, and somebody would say, "Oh, that's good. Keep up the breastfeeding." And she says, "No, I'm not into that. I don't breastfeed." Now, to each their own. There's women that will not breastfeed, but when you start to see all these layers,
it's very attention-centered and attention-driven.
Right.
From a media standpoint, I'm curious how or when your newsroom kind of, it seems like all media outlets in town there was a point where we all zoned in on her. Right. As the primary person that we're focusing on for coverage, right? So for you in your newsroom, do you remember that conversation or how that came about? Like when you guys kind of said, you know what, we're really looking at her and not at him for what this case is?
Well, I think there were a couple different perspectives and different avenues on how we ultimately got there. I think when initially, and this kind of goes back to when the body is discovered, these are two young parents. And you can wrap your mind around, could there have been an accident? Could something have happened? I mean, they're found in Michigan minus the baby. She says it's with the grandparents. She says Jackson's with their grandparents. And you are trying to give the benefit of the doubt to these parents. What could have transpired here, right? Was it a terrible accident and you panicked and you didn't know what to do? Or was it something more sinister? And as things started to evolve, it became clear this is not a tragic accident. This wasn't SIDS and they panicked. And I think that was through a multitude of different aspects of Jenna's personality. Right. Her YouTube page, that lends some questionable, what do you, why are you going on and smoking on YouTube in a home where you have two little ones and ranting and raving about it? Just, you start to have these like red flag warnings, question marks, you start to feel uneasy about her. And then when she's arrested and charged, you said, okay, well, obviously the authorities have zoomed in on her and also on Jeffrey, but when she came and did that perp walk, this smirk that she had, the look on her face, The smirk, I think, is what got all of us, because we're watching this, in real time. And I just, for a grieving mother, if this was a terrible accident, you don't smile while you're walking to jail because your baby died. And I think it was at that point that we said, she's the one behind all of this, right? Potentially.
Yeah.
We started to zoom in on her and focus on her. But, Jeffrey was on the hook just as long.
The other thing that we haven't even discussed is the fact that it became obvious at some point in the media investigation as well that she was spending a lot of money on things. And I believe we interviewed several people that said, well, she had bought, a new car and she was racing and, adding, souping up her vehicles. But Jeffrey was not home at the time that she was doing this. It was very clear that he was deployed. So I think that was I don't know how you guys approach that, but it seemed to us as though, okay, well, she's kind of living this other life or doing what she's wanting to do while he wasn't home.
Right.
And I'm not a military spouse, so I don't know the dynamic of how that works when you're, we live in a military,
we live in a military town, and that's not uncommon that you see that, these men and women go over to serve our country and their spouse decides that they're going to do whatever they want.
Right.
It's not uncommon. We see it happen, unfortunately. But that really was the picture. Jeffrey was the soldier. He was deployed. He's serving our country. So I think in some ways he gets the benefit of the doubt for that. And then she's the one portraying herself in such a light. He didn't have a social media account that had all of these, extreme
And that could have changed everything from a media standpoint if he had those same types of, if he had a public Facebook account or things that we could have seen a window into his mind. But he was really locked down as far as all of that was concerned.
His Facebook page was pretty much just sports.
Right.
Just football.
Yeah.
And family. Like pictures of him and Jenna, but at the same time, you really didn't see pictures of the kids. But looking at the timeline, you're thinking, well, he was deployed at that time, so maybe that's why. But yeah, it's one of those where you see her attention seeking constantly, from her Instagram posts and Facebook, and then starting the YouTube channel. And my personal opinion, and I'm allowed to have this because I'm not a reporter and all that stuff, but my personal opinion is that you have this person that's so just centered on herself that she thinks that her opinion means the world to people.
Right.
And it really doesn't. And I think that's part of the problem that we have with younger generation, that they need to have this outlet to show people what they're doing constantly. It's me.
Yeah, look at me kind of culture.
Charlie's about to tell some kids to get off his lawn right now.
I think what's interesting is that I think that was an observation that a lot of us made. And then to hear from your interview with her friend from high school that she was always trying to make it seem like she had the best of everything and they were buying a house and she was living this great lifestyle and nothing was ever wrong. It really kind of confirmed what a lot of us kind of have that perception of Jenna from what she portrays herself as.
Even that conversation was interesting, how she was portraying, oh, well, we have a house and we have this. And it's like, no, you're renting a house on the Army's dime.
Right.
Because you're
not working.
You also get, the more dependents you have, the more money you get from the Army, clearly, right? So you're looking at somebody who's obviously moved into a home probably because you gained an extra dependent. Right? So, you're getting a little bit extra money for your housing. And you're portraying that as, oh, I'm doing so well on all of your social media accounts.
Well, I think we heard from people that know her, and obviously Joe Spencer's account is from Jeffrey's perspective, but that she was manipulative. That was what people were saying about her, is that she was manipulative. So why wouldn't she manipulate her status in life on her social media account?
Right.
That's classic, right?
One of the things that I thought that was new to me by listening to Kat's interview was the fact that I had never heard that Jenna had spent time in juvie before. Was that something that you guys knew?
No, not to my recollection, especially because, juvenile records are sealed.
Right, exactly.
And this was in a different state. So
Did it surprise you? Did it surprise you at all to find that out?
I wasn't surprised by that.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about her? What was she like back in high school?
She was always in and out of juvenile.
Oh, really? Like,
Yeah.
they're at school or outside of school?
Outside of school, she was always like stealing, and she was also like in actual jail.
Oh,
for
really?
Children.
Do you know what that was for?
I think she said it was like stealing, and she thought it was cool, and I was like, oh, that's not cool.
Right. So that's juvenile detention. And the reason I asked her is because some schools do actually have, like,
C school or something
yeah,
like that.
kind of like a dropout recovery program or some type of, when they get pulled over or when they get cited or in trouble with the school police, then they have some type of program. But this was not just the school thing. This was actually like the state juvenile detention facility. So it wasn't like she skipped school a few times and she got in trouble. She was actually stealing.
Which
And-
goes back to the materialistic aspects of her personality as well. Spending the money on things like, that were outwardly, okay, I'm buying a new car and look at my house and look at all these things when, in fact, inside that house, you have no furniture. Your kids aren't being fed, which is, it's a status, that was very important, clearly, to her. And that was something that seemed like it was a pattern for a while.
One thing that I find is, this might be really petty, but I researched this a lot, and I found no record of them ever living in a 2-story house, ever. And I found it interesting when she talks about moving from an apartment, 3-story apartment, to a 2-story house. It seems like she felt the need to embellish even that part. That's just my, that's the way I see it.
Does anything surprise you at this point with what she says or does?
And I'll tell you, the hours and hours of editing and having to listen to her voice and watch the videos, really, you can ask Andra, because I was in a bitchy mood the last week. Because I know what I'm getting into by working on these podcasts, but this is one that really bothered me because she is everything that she claimed to hate. Everything that she was attacking other people about, she was even worse than that. And that's BS.
Sometimes the people that speak the loudest have the most to hide.
Yeah. And I just don't understand how somebody cannot feed their child.
Which I think is the saddest part.
Even people that live in poverty manage to keep their children alive.
And when that child's crying or upset, as a maternal instinct, no matter how cynical or how much of a dark humor you have, that's still your child, and you still have a need to comfort that tiny person.
Yeah.
So,
Which I think, that can't be lost in all of this. I mean, there are so many different extremes and interesting facets to this story and Jenna's personality and what happened. But at the end of the day, we have, a baby who died, and we may never know exactly how baby Jackson died. They're not going to go. They didn't go to trial. There's not different theories being presented. It's just...
It'll take many years for these records to become available, and maybe there's something in those journals. Maybe there's something in the statements that they gave to police. But it is one of those things, because it is a child neglect or abuse case, that they're going to seal those records for a long time.
And I think, to your point too, Charlie, we're talking about getting worked up this week, going through all of this material and all of the information related to the case. And that's something too for reporters. I mean, when you're talking about a baby death, that is just grips at your heart. How does it not pull at your heart? And it's difficult to report on. It's hard to think that your parents are the ones that are supposed to shelter you and protect you and love you and keep you safe. And ultimately, that was not the case for baby Jackson. And whatever happens to his parents, I think that that's important, that we just never forget that he was so innocent.
The most important thing for reporters really is, as far as publicly, we're really not allowed, you're not supposed to state your opinions on things. You are supposed to report the facts. But you're human. At the end of the day, you're human. And so it's really difficult when you're reporting stories like this to not get your emotions involved or not to be upset. And so you saw that in some of the reporters actually that when they did the perp walk, because you could feel. I'll go ahead and pose the question to Jen and then see. We'll go kind of from there. How many perp walks have we covered since that?
There've been a handful. A lot of corruption. Corruption
ones, which usually come from the FBI.
Right.
This particular one, just so that everybody out there knows, typically if the El Paso Police or the Sheriff's Department, if they're handling a case, they make their own arrests. In the case where you have somebody that flees jurisdictions, the agency that apprehends and brings them back, which is a combination of a couple different agencies, but really is the El Paso Sheriff's Department. So that'll end up being kind of the arresting agency. And I believe in this case, it was the sheriff's office that called and said, hey, we're going to go ahead and move her in tonight. And for us, that was really unusual.
Yeah, to get the heads up.
From sheriff's office, yes. So in my mind, it was like they knew that the media wanted to see this, really, and, talk to because typically they won't. They don't do that in regular criminal cases, especially the sheriff's office. They typically keep most of their things under wraps. Well, so that was one of the things that stood out to me when I was watching, when I was recalling.
PD does not let us know when they're going to do a perp walk, when they're going to take somebody in. But also, when we know somebody's going to be extradited, that gives us time to set up and be ready at the jail in downtown El Paso, so that when they do get brought in, we are able to get them. We did the same thing with the man who killed Officer David Ortiz. He was extradited, so there was a perp walk for him. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowing, like, they're coming from another place.
Jurisdiction.
Another jurisdiction, so they're going to be coming through.
But, I mean, of course, we look at that case and, Jeffrey we weren't given a heads up on his extradition. We were on hers. So, I don't know the reason for that, and you can take your own assumptions, but the fact that she was dirty, the fact that she was smirky.
And
he was also, she can't say that. Jen can't say this, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there. Like, I really do think that the sheriff's office said, you know what? Go ahead and put this out there. Yeah, go ahead and, show her as she is, because they were kind of disturbed by it too. It's quite possible.
Jeffrey, just to be clear, Jeffrey was he was considered AWOL. So he was
military.
It was a military extradition, and so that is its own realm.
Right. And I was going to ask, because obviously when he was extradited, they both waived their extradition, so they both agreed to come back. But it was different for Jenna, her being a civilian. There's a longer process to that. With Jeffrey, he was already AWOL, so the federal warrant which held him there in Michigan is the same one that brought him back.
Immediately.
Yeah, it's just federal jurisdiction. So with different states, there's different procedures and stuff. But one thing that I was going to ask, do you remember if when Jenna was extradited, because they gave word that it's going to take 10 days, so the media already had some advance notice, but did she come back in a commercial airliner? Did the media just look at the time and say, okay, then she's going to be arriving around this time?
No.
No, I think if I remember correctly, I feel like we may have gotten a heads up from Michigan, and then they let us know here, but I can't remember exactly.
I think we did. So, we did the math on when she was going to come in, and we just asked.
There were public jail records up there, so I think we were able to check, like, is she still in their custody or not? So I think if I remember,
up in Michigan.
But we had to check all that stuff.
But
daily.
She did.
It's just also making constant phone calls to, like I talked about earlier, when you have good relationships with your local authorities, and you're making constant phone calls like, hey, when are you going to bring her in? When are you taking custody of her? If you have a good relationship, they'll let you know, we're going to take custody of her at this time. And, that's not a secret.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I'm not completely sure about, maybe you guys know, is that when the police department went out to Oro Grande and they were looking for the general area, from what I understood, they used the Jenna's cell phone records and the towers to get a general idea of where they had been. But Jeffrey's lawyer, Joe Spencer, said that it was Jeffrey that actually led the police to them. Somebody that I spoke to that's in law enforcement also told me that they used a dog to actually find the location. Do you know if it was one or the other or a combination?
I think
of
it was
things?
probably a combination. I don't know. It was my understanding that he had told them where, and I think that they used the cell phone records to corroborate that they were both there. See, I think that's the important part, is because he didn't go by himself, was my understanding. They went together. So I think that was the other part, is that they needed to also prove that both of them had been in the area.
I think there's a lot of layers to an investigation, and detectives will take different approaches to get to that same result. So Jeffrey may have told them that, this is where we dumped the body, but you're also potentially going to need a dog. It's a desert area. Nothing is marked.
Especially if they went out there in the dark.
And it wasn't immediately off the road, right?
Well, and who knows what tactics detectives had when they confronted Jeffrey, because we talked about their picture was picked up on the checkpoint.
Right.
So
by Border Patrol.
When you're talking about a family going missing, that is going to be, and I know this from covering from different cases and also from working with Border Patrol, it's not uncommon that detectives will go to them and ask to look for a vehicle and look for these pictures, because that's the only way to get out of El Paso. You're going to go through a checkpoint.
Right.
So they may have already had the images of them going up to that checkpoint. They may have already triangulated their cell phone records and presented Jeffrey with, this is the evidence against you. It's time to be honest. And we just don't know how it all transpired.
Not just that, but the technology that they have at the checkpoints is, people don't understand that they have microwave technology, they have infrared technology, they have high shutter speed cameras, they have the works. So
and obviously, they're keeping that record for quite some time.
Right.
If we're talking 3 weeks out and they were still able to get those records, it's not like you go through and all that stuff's purged in a day.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Santa's always watching.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the last part that I wanted to bring up, which was the quote from Joe Spencer. Let's hear
out in the desert, one of the things that came up is that Jenna was kept insisting that she wanted a shallow grave, and Jeffrey was saying, "No, we got to make it deeper. No, we'll make it shallow because this way, if the coyotes find the baby, they can get rid of the evidence." And that was an insight into her mindset.
Now, was that something that you guys heard at the time, or was that something new to you also?
That was new information to me, and I think to a lot of people that covered the case, because it never went to trial.
Right.
And what Mr. Spencer is sharing with you is information that he obtained through representing Jeffrey. So that wasn't something that was public record. It wasn't public knowledge. It's disturbing if true, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Mr. Spencer had a vested interest in securing a good deal for his client, and so it's easy to put it all on Jenna.
A little biased, yeah.
But her mindset being that what we've seen represented and how she's characterized herself and spoken to other people, and I mean,
the line of where Jackson was when they were in Michigan, the smirk on the perp walk, the videos on YouTube, everything that leads up to this point doesn't make it surprising that she would say something.
It's not surprising, because like we talked about earlier, she has a vested interest in Jenna. She is very committed to making sure, and self-preservation, that she did not get caught. She thought she was going to outsmart detectives by all appearances, right, from her the work that she's done to get away with it, that she probably thought this was part of the plan, right? If the coyotes come and they take the baby, then there won't be any remains to find, and he'll just be a missing child for forever. So it's not surprising at all. I think one of the saddest parts of this whole story is that his body was so badly decomposed that the medical examiner will never be able to give conclusive information as to how he died, and so we just never have those answers.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of answers that we won't ever know about this case, and that, I think, from anybody who is a human and has a heart, is very difficult, because it's one of those things where you'll never understand how not one but two people were culpable or conspired together to hide evidence of a child's death or were responsible for a child's death. And I know that when he said that in our interview, I don't know if we left the sound in. There was a couple minutes pause, and then I think you can both hear us kind of sigh or gasp. And I still feel it every time I listen to it, because to me, like, that is like a next level of depravity to me.
Yeah.
It goes beyond, it goes beyond.
They had so many opportunities, I think, in looking in the totality of this case, to do the right thing.
Right.
To when the baby, if the baby is showing symptoms of malnutrition, which he had to have been if the medical examiner is correct in saying that the baby was underweight and malnourished for his age, right? That there were opportunities to just take accountability for your actions. But it was this constant, well, I don't want to get in trouble with CPS, so now we're not going to take the baby to the doctor. Now the baby's dead. By how? We don't know. Well, we still don't know if the baby died of natural causes or, really asphyxiated or what, right? So now, and then we're going to cover it up by burying the baby. And then we're going to fake our own abduction, that we're on a suicide mission, and we're going to just totally take off and be these missing people. It's these constant layers of self-preservation to not take any accountability and not to go to jail, not to be in trouble. And it just keeps getting worse for them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Genevieve, thank you so much for...
Now that you got me all worked up, Charlie.
Right?
Andra, right?
I'm sorry. It's one of those stories.
Yeah.
It's one of those, you're never going to be okay when you talk about this story.
It's one of those that if the people that were here at the time, they'll remember it. No
Forever.
doubt they're going to remember it.
Yeah.
I actually told Charlie last night, I said, you know what, can we do one that I didn't cover? Because I was here in a newsroom at the time. And so I have like some real like emotional, like, things that come up for me when this case, and it's the one that we did before this, I wasn't working. It was, in the 80s, so I can be a little bit more emotionally detached from it and look at the documents. But something like this, I just said, let's do something that I never covered, because this one was just too much for me. I can't,
and for me,
Yeah.
Even though I'm not involved in this case in any way, it's more therapeutic to have this, because we try to keep the regular episodes based on facts and try to keep our opinions out of it. And this is something like, you have to be able to speak out and say, this is disgusting how this happened. And for me, this is probably going to be, we already know which 8 cases we're covering in the podcast. This is the one that I was dreading the most. And I can tell you after 3 weeks, I'm done with this.
I think there's one other one that's probably going to be as bad, but yes, I think that you're right.
It's emotionally taxing because it involves a child,
Right.
and obviously we talked about the parents are supposed to protect their children. I think that the district attorney's office did a great job in getting justice for little Jackson. He obviously, was the victim here, and his parents are held accountable. But I wonder if there had been a trial, if there would be more clarity, or if it would just be even more he said, she said, Jenna blaming Jeffrey blaming Jenna. I mean, who knows? We won't know how it would have played out in a courtroom. But I wonder for people if it just felt, because at least when everything came down a few months after they were brought back, and then they decided to plea, and we were doing the stories on them pleading, it almost felt like, so that's it? Like, that's the end? Right. After all of this spectacle, this nationwide Nancy Grace spectacle that took place, and all these layers to this story, the injury to a child by omission, 25, 35 years, done. Like, that's it? Like, that's...
And that's what a lot of people had a hard time understanding at the time.
It feels very unsatisfied. Right. Like, you just feel like you don't feel good about the end, even though the parents have taken accountability and they are in jail and they will be in jail.
Jeffrey's slated, he can get out as early as 2 years from now.
Right. He has
4 years.
4 years from now. Yeah,
22.
4 years. And Jenna,
they have a possibility
2049.
of parole. Right.
And as far as I understand, Jenna has no option of parole. She's going to serve the complete time. She has
to serve it all.
2049.
Yeah, and he has the option.
Luckily, Blake is with Jeffrey's parents, who Jenna's acquaintance, who we interviewed. She said that that's actually where they met Jackson or Blake at the time, and that it's a great home, and the parents were really nice, and it
a good, loving, supportive family, and so
well, you just hope the best for him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, unfortunately, this child is going to have to, grow up knowing that, his parents are responsible for doing something pretty terrible, and so that's enough therapy
You're
for
growing up without the brother that you could have had.
for sure. Yes. So, well, I thank you again for coming and talking about this sad case.
Thanks for having me. I know Can we talk about a different? Well, I guess all of your cases are going to be.
Yeah,
sad.
They're probably all going to be sad.
All right.
Stuff.
Well, thank you
guys.
so much.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Closing Arguments. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, and Stitcher, and anywhere else that you find your podcast. If you would like to support this podcast, please visit patreon.com/testify. Also, to get behind the scenes content, make sure to visit us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.